Well, hello and welcome to Insight with Political Tours, the travel company led by reporters around the world. 6 months on and still no end in sight, Israel seems determined to carry on its war in Gaza, and it would seem not much to show for it. Hostages have not been released since last December, and Hamas is still in power. And with the number of Gazan dead at 33,000 and climbing by the day, the rest of the world seems unable or perhaps unwilling to do anything about it. Today, we have two well-known Palestinian commentators to give us their take on the war. They are Taghreed El-Khodary, a journalist and former New York Times correspondent in Gaza. Hello, Taghreed.
Hello, hi.
And Sam Bahour, an American Palestinian businessman who splits his time between the US and Ramallah in the West Bank. Hello, Sam.
Hello.
Good to have you both with us. I'm going to start with something that seems very obvious, but I think is actually amazingly lacking in global media. And that's just to talk about the people who are really suffering in Gaza. We've talked about 33,000 dead, but there are 2.2, 2.3, is it more, million people who are lacking food and for the many part don't have homes to go to. Taghreed, I want you to talk a bit about your family. And I know this is a long story in some ways, so we can only sort of cover part of it. But you're from Gaza City itself. Tell me just a bit about your family and what's happened to them.
Yeah, I'm from Gaza City, Ramallah area, very close to Shifa Hospital. That was all over the news. Luckily, my family made it out of Gaza City. And first they moved to middle areas, that is Deir el-Balah, and then to Rafah. Luckily, part of my family now, they are in Cairo. Other family members, they live very close to Shifa Hospital. One is seriously injured. One cousin is seriously injured, and the others, they fled to Rafah. The thing is, the homes are completely demolished by the Israeli strikes. And I have neighbors that keep sending me how our house is looking like, now. And it's really, I cannot look at the images. It's extremely.
What has happened to your house? What has happened to it?
Killed by Israeli strikes. And for us, this house is like what my father left for us. Whatever happened to you, you have always a house that I built myself for you all, including my sisters, my brothers. This is the house of the family. This is the house for everyone to whenever you are in need, this is a house that is always for you. So my mother, who is 75-year old, being forced to leave her house and her garden that she loves. And yesterday I spoke to her and she's like, she wonders what happened to the fruits, and on those trees that she planted herself, all the trees, and who is feeding her kind of birds, because she really created a beautiful garden for her grandchildren. And this is all, kind of, my God, destroyed, partially destroyed, severely destroyed. I don't know, you see images and you cannot really look. It's still standing, but really shelled, many shells, hit the house. And we try not to show her the images. And but the thing is, now they are in Cairo, and imagine living, they need to rent apartments. My nephews who managed to go, they are unable to go to any schools or universities, no residency. So it's like, and I tried to bring two nephews to Amsterdam, but again, the double standard of Europe, no visas, because they're against the, immigrants to come.
If you've been a refugee from Ukraine, the situation might have been very different. But because
Yeah, we welcomed the Ukrainians when they came here, we donated with clothing, food, even the schools played a role. Yeah. Banks here played a role in Amsterdam, every aspect of life in Amsterdam played a role to help Ukrainian refugees. And here I tried to bring two nephews to spend the time here till the war is over, but visa is denied and there is no warranty they will go back. But if you are against, for God's sake, refugees, why this country, why Europe didn't stand against the war from day one? Why they didn't, they gave Israel the green light, but they didn't add, but respect international law from day one. They did not do that.
Okay, I'll come back to that in a second, but I think I should add that it's pretty unusual that your family have been able to get out. And I know you spent a huge amount of effort lobbying the Egyptian authorities to try and get your family out. But for the vast majority of people, that's not possible. And you still have relatives left behind.
Yes, many relatives, and in many kind of relatives, they used to have decent, business. Their business is over, and they are desperate for money in order to buy food that is worth so much money nowadays in Gaza.
Can you give us an idea of those costs? I mean, just to get bread, rice.
$1,000 for a big sack of flour. A cigarette one cigarette will cost you 50 shekel. I mean, 15 euro to have, one cigarette, not like the pack of, the sugar, the prices are extremely hard to comprehend. And I mean, and they are desperate for me to help them. And I try to ask people who want to donate if they can transfer money to them. And we managed, here and there to send money for people to buy for their kids, flour, vegetables, whatever. They have scarcity of all these basic needs that you need, to survive. And I cannot believe we have reached to this stage of of Israel being able to use that as a weapon. I mean, and the world is watching and only condemning. This is extremely hard to take. And I really, what else? I feel like what Israel did, they killed every beautiful thing, every beautiful memory of the place that is Gaza. That wherever you used to go as a child on the beach, the places that reminds you of childhood is completely vanished. Like the courthouse, they had, the Israeli soldiers in the courthouse where people register if they get married, if they get divorced, if they have a birth certificate, wherever, if you register your land that you own it. This they destroyed completely. And that is, really, if you define what's genocide, they not they didn't only target people as civilians, but also every aspect that can bring the place to life again.
Society and government.
Yes. Yeah. They have targeted every aspect that can bring the place back again, to stand back again. And now many Palestinians in Gaza, they cannot envision rebuilding the place again because of the destruction that Israel, did so far.
Okay. Sam, I want to come to you. We visited you regularly until the war broke out in Ramallah. Fantastic speaker for all our groups. But you're now in Youngstown, Ohio. You've got Ramallah and the West Bank behind you just there, and I think you're due to go back there shortly. But you're back in the States at the moment. That puts you in a very good position to see the media coverage of the war. And I want to pick up on one recent and perhaps a very obvious example, and that's the bombing of the NGO convoy. I forgot the name of the kitchen charity that was hit by
World Kitchen.
World Kitchen. How did that? I mean, that got a lot of coverage, but I wonder if that was in contrast to what you'd normally see.
Thank you, Nicholas, and hi, Taghreed. Actually, being here for 2 weeks has given me a perspective which we know about and we hear about, but seeing it live is really a different feeling. You feel that the only time this is getting attention is first when Westerners are killed, and only when the White House wants to make an issue about it. It's also something which is in a news cycle. So it's out of the news cycle when Iran strikes or when Ukraine has something going on, or worse yet and pitiful, when Trump says something, it overshadows all of these major global events. It's not something new, but it's something very profound when we understand, like Taghreed was saying, the extent of what is happening. This is not about 33,000 people dying. This is about a society being erased. And as she properly said, I'm a business person, so I'm looking at this in terms of the day after, how do we start to rebuild Gaza? Nobody knows where to start. There is not a starting point that we can see today, especially because it's not ended yet. So looking at it from the US side is really, I would say, pathetic, to be honest, because if the US did not support blindly the state of Israel, first, we wouldn't have gotten to this point, and second, this war would have stopped a long time ago. This administration, because also it's a electoral season, has squarely lined up behind a government in Israel that even Biden has had issues with over his career. But today it's not the time for him to speak out because he needs the pro-Israeli lobby support for his electoral campaign. And this is something that we need to call out. I mean, I'm an American as much as I'm a Palestinian, and I think as an American, this is revealing, like no other conflict, how broken the U.S. political system is. And if anything else, Americans should thank the Palestinians for revealing the crisis that the political system is in, the short-sightedness, and acting outside of U.S. interests, which it's hard to even say that. The U.S. Congress, both Senate and Congress, is acting outside of the U.S. strategic interests in the region. And I believe this is something very unique this time around, is that it is the first time in history that the Palestinian issue has touched an electoral presidential campaign in the U.S. That has never happened before. And if we understand the U.S., we know that getting elected is supreme to all other issues. So for the Palestinian issue to be able to affect how the Democratic Party or others are going to vote is something which gives Palestinians some leverage. And to be honest with you, being here, I was in Boston, now I'm in Ohio, and I've spoken to students in both areas. The mobilization on the ground is unprecedented. Not only from the Palestinian American community, but from American progressive community in general. And I think, as we saw in Michigan a couple of weeks ago with the uncommitted vote, that the Democratic Party is taking note. This is causing them damage.
Just to repeat that, Sam, just to clarify, that was there was the Democratic primary, which you would think that Biden's the obvious candidate, but people actually have to vote for him, don't they? There's a process where he does have to get renominated. So just what happened in Michigan?
There was a campaign by people who are speaking out against this war in Gaza, and they expected that with their campaign, they would get 10,000 people to vote uncommitted in the primary. Now, voting in a primary is not going to disrupt Biden's chance to get on the ticket. So they use it as an opportunity to make a statement, knowing that it's not going to make Trump come into office. They had targeted 10,000 people to vote uncommitted in the primaries from the Democratic Party. They got 100,000 people to vote uncommitted. And that shook up the White House, and it shook up the Democratic Party. After that, they deployed several high-level Democratic officials to be able to go to Michigan and start talking to people. And they found out that this is not about appeasing the Arab American or Muslim American community. This is about standing against a potential genocide that is happening only because the U.S. funded it. And people were very blunt with them, and by saying, this is not about you visiting us and we get all fuzzy because you're an official coming to our community. This is about you need to take a stand right now. And that's something that will be built upon in the future. The Democratic Party per se is changing. The constituency is clearly changing. Pew reports are actually identifying that change has been happening over years. The established Democratic Party refuses to take note of that and make the policy changes that are required. And that's where we stand today.
Okay, I will come back to politics in a second in the States. Taghreed, I want to is there anything that's given you more hope? There are two cases taking place now in The Hague, and I know you've gone to some of the court hearings. There's one, well, there are two, I think, in the International Courts of Justice. One is for Palestine, the case that Palestine is illegally occupied, and that's a case that's been going on since 2022, something that precedes this conflict. And then there's the genocide case. So can you say, have you gone along to some of those hearings, and do they give you any hope, or do you think this is just some kind of moral statement? What's your take on that, Taghreed?
At some point after, like during the beginning, like before South Africa went to the International Court of Justice, I lost hope completely. But the moment South Africa made it there, it's kind of all of a sudden, I regained the smile that I always, had. I regained my strength. It was extremely powerful. Sadly, I like it that it's South Africa giving the history of apartheid, and you can, like you feel like extremely happy that it's South Africa that came all the way, but for a country where where these courts are located, like the Netherlands, none of the European country made it, like called for such court to take place, and I was so empowered by South Africa, really, like it has it has brought me back to the way I used to, really, thanks to South Africa, after all, and shame for countries like, I'm sorry for the international community that is Europe, the US, shame, and whatever they taught us in the universities, because I studied in American universities, I live in Europe, and no way that you can accept them lecturing you over democracy, over human rights. It's not accepted anymore. Given, the double standard that, their position, kind of, it took them a while to speak about the importance of Israel to abide by the international.
I want to get to Sam, to get your take too. I mean, the question I was putting to Taghreed was, we don't know what the judgments are in both of those cases. One is about whether Palestine is illegally or occupied, and whether Palestine has the right to self-determination. And there's a very famous British QC involved in that case, Philippe Sands, who won a similar case for the Chagos Islands against the UK. So that would probably give good potential to that case. And then there's the other case of which raises the question of genocide, and that hearing hasn't started yet. I can't see either of those cases having direct impact on this conflict. Can you?
Yeah, first, just for a correction, there's actually more than two cases. There's actually four going on right now. The South African genocide case that you guys mentioned. There's the case against the occupation itself, which actually was started from a UN resolution back in 2022. But there's also a new case from Nicaragua coming against Germany as an arms supplier to Israel, and taking that to court. Germany supports Israel by 30% of its arms exports. And there's a fourth one, which is actually the oldest one, which is a request from the Palestinians to the International Criminal Court, not the Court of Justice, but the Criminal Court, over a decade ago, asking the Criminal Court to open up an investigation into what Israel was doing in the West Bank. And the court refused to open up that case. Just to give you an example, in Ukraine, in the first year, hundreds of cases were opened up in the ICC against individuals that were responsible for the war there. So it's clear that institutionally, there is a bias against holding Israel accountable. And that takes me to your question. The entire institution of international law is being challenged right now. We are seeing that from the Security Council to the General Assembly, to these courts, the heavy players, the US mainly, is able to block progress in bringing these cases to justice. So although I don't have a lot of hope that this hijacked institutional framework is going to bring justice to the Palestinians. I do think it's critically important that we do bring these cases, put the facts in front of the international community, and let them see the U.S. bias by facts and not by slogans. And that's what's happening now. Actually, I watched the 3-hour presentation of the Palestinian representatives when they made the case against the occupation. In my opinion, it was the best ever Palestinian presentation of their struggle in entirety. If you have 3 hours, watch it. They bring the case from its beginning until today. It's not about genocide only. It's about the entire 75 plus years of slow back burner genocide that has never been brought to the forefront. So although these cases aren't a silver bullet to bring this to an end, they are very important elements in a much larger strategy of exposing how the U.S. mainly is supporting, if not genocide, mass killing, if not mass killing, war crimes. I mean, you can call it what you want. At the end of the day, these are horrific events that are being supported by what's supposedly be the leader of the democratic world, which is clearly being challenged today.
And it's worth mentioning that members of the Israeli government have made would support that policy. They want to get rid of the PA. They don't believe in a Palestinian state, and they believe that Gaza should also be settled too. And some of their statements, actually, one of them has been imprisoned for or prosecuted for his statements.
One of the most renowned Israeli judges who was on the genocide bench. Basically voted yes, that Israel is inciting this. Israel is in violation of inciting against violence, inciting against genocide. That's an Israeli judge who was brought in to be on the bench of the ICJ. So it's pretty bold that even Israelis are speaking out about the horrific events that are taking place. The question is not what's taking place. I think we can all see that on our own screens. The question is, where is the political will to stop it? And more than that, where is the political will to resolve this at its core? And that's not being discussed about today in a serious way.
Sam, we've also, and Taghreed, we've got to talk about Hamas here. If Israel's responsible for terrible crimes, Hamas is certainly responsible for terrible crimes too. And how would you like to see that dealt with? I mean, I'm all in favor of Israeli members of the IDF and Israeli politicians being brought up before the ICC. It's not happening. I'm all in favor of Yahya Sinwar being brought up before the ICC. That's not happening either. How do you think Hamas should be dealt with? And Hamas has dominated Gaza for so long, and it's very difficult to see them disappearing as a result of this war either. So I leave that to Ivy Taghreed to give your reaction to that.
I just want to reflect on the International Court of Justice. You know, the importance is for the first time you have non-Palestinians bringing the Israel long occupation into the spotlight. And sadly, it took a genocide for this to happen. This is the importance of it. And you have non-Palestinians speaking, and it's extremely empowering. I know what will be the result of the court, whatever. But again, they brought facts, you know, and it's extremely empowering for us. And it is occupation. And all of a sudden, it's back. It's like everybody is learning about it. The young generation all over the world now is taking like a class on, you know, like through all these news about, oh my God, there is occupation. And you know, these young crowd, they learn about it from social media. Sadly, it's not from the mainstream media. And
I guess my point is that nothing justifies what Hamas did. Nothing justifies what Israel is doing. And the point is that we've talked about Israel as reality, the occupation as a reality. Hamas is also a reality. And I'm trying to get your analysis of where you think that might be going.
Yeah, as long as there is a military occupation, and as long as Israel is continuing with such policies, you know, you will have groups like Hamas. And with genocide, what kind of a group are you bringing? If you are unhappy with Hamas, you know, if now the children are witnessing the killing of their parents, entire family, destroying of their home, what are you coming, what kind of a generation you are bringing? This is a question. There is so much anger. There is so much hatred now, I mean, towards Israel that one can understand. But I think what Israel is doing is harming its future. Whatever, I mean, like, what is now Israel? Israel is committing genocide, and we are witnessing it, and the world is witnessing it, and not doing anything. Now, back to Hamas, of course, you have the silent majority in Gaza giving, the heavy price they paid. It's genocide. Israel responded to October 7 by genocide. So of course, one can expect that the silent majority is angry at Hamas. Why didn't you calculate, that you have criminal in the Israeli government? What kind of response they will respond? Why didn't you calculate? This is, people are angry at Hamas. But again, okay, Palestine is not only Gaza. Now, Hamas is extremely popular now, given what Israel is doing, killing civilians, including children, women, elderly, destroying homes, destroying completely the infrastructure of the place that is Gaza, and whatever practices they are doing in the West Bank. Well, Hamas is now very popular, according to the latest polls, in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem and in exile, among Palestinians in exile, and also in the region. Because Hamas now is telling you, believe in violence resistance. And many people, giving what Israel is doing on the ground, they believe in that, given that the peaceful option, the negotiation, has not led anywhere. And it was clear when Netanyahu went and he gave his famous speech, the last speech at the UN, and he presented a map of Israel, and he didn't even show Gaza or West Bank. The whole country was only Israel for him. So, and he went to the way for him forward is going to normalization with the Saudis and neglect completely the Palestinian cause. So, I mean,
So Sam, in some ways, there is a victory for Hamas there, isn't there? They've changed the political reality. They've stopped normalization with the Saudis. They are the people that Israel are focused on. Their popularity is way up, but that's also deeply damaging for the Palestinian cause internationally.
Yes, I think it will be a very short-lived victory, if it's a victory at all. I think we need to keep in mind there's two things when we speak of Hamas. There's a political reality, a domestic Palestinian political reality that's ignored for the last 2 decades. And there is what specific conditions Hamas was governing or trying to govern under siege in the Gaza Strip for the last 16 years. If we take the bigger picture, is that Hamas officially won an election to the Palestinian parliament. They should have been allowed to govern. It's not because I'm a supporter of Hamas. Actually, I'm not. But if I can take, as an American, 4 years of Bush Jr. or Trump, I can take 4 years of Hamas. The idea of allowing them to govern was key back in the early 2000s, because I actually think they would have collapsed on their own, under their own weight. Because managing a chain of mosques is not like managing a international conflict and having to serve a civil servant community and so forth. The U.S. put a veto on the day they were elected. They allowed them and they encouraged them to run in elections, Palestinian elections. But when they won, and Jimmy Carter was there with his observation team and said this was a very proper election, when they won, the U.S. refused to allow them to govern. That was the beginning of the split between Hamas taking over the Gaza Strip and Fatah, the other larger party, taking over the West Bank. From that time, we've had 16 years of a brutal siege on Gaza by Israel, 4 wars. Those are only the big ones. There's some minor ones as well. 4 military onslaughts against Gaza, which brought Hamas to the point to believe that there was no way out. The world was forgetting them. Israel and the region started talking about normalization and just brushed aside not only Hamas, but the entire Palestinian issue. And their way to deal with that was to break out of their concentration camp and sadly execute some war crimes in the meantime. Those are wrong. And to answer your question very directly, Hamas operatives who were involved in such attacks should be held accountable equally under international law. International law is very wise. International law differentiates between killing a person and trying to wipe out an entire people. That's called genocide. This is called a war crime. And they should be held accountable to the crimes that they have committed. But the crime of breaking out of their concentration camp is not a crime at all. I'm actually surprised that it took 16 years for any Gazan to be able to say, I've had enough, I want to get out of this. Remember, before October 7th, Gaza was not allowed to have most products come into Gaza. At one point, pasta and children's crayons were not allowed into Gaza. That's before October 7th. So you can imagine what has been percolating within the Gaza environment, which sparked this military response. I personally, as a Palestinian, hold Hamas greatly responsible, just like I do the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. Both of them are taking unilateral decisions. One, in the West Bank, bear hugging the U.S., thinking that if they just appease the U.S., freedom will come. And one in Gaza thinking that they have the military might to bring freedom about by a military action. Both of them are wrong. Both of them are wrong primarily because they're taking unilateral decisions. They refuse to understand that without a unified political body collectively taking a decision, that they cannot go forward. I would take the decision of actually resisting nonviolently and not blindly going into a peace process, and definitely not thinking that we can beat Israel militarily. But that's my opinion. The unilateralism in their decisions is something that will come back to haunt them when they're held accountable, both sides, as we move forward.
I'd love to get questions directly. Hang on, Taghreed. I'd love to get more questions, people, so we can put you directly. You can ask Taghreed and Sam your questions, and we'll come to Marty Ryan in just a second. Taghreed, you were saying, go on.
No, I agree with Sam, and that's why the policy of Israel in eradicating Hamas, it doesn't work, because there is no alternative, given what also Fatah is wrongly doing. As long as there is no unified leadership, Palestinian leadership that agrees on a unified strategy on how to end the occupation, nothing will work. So neither party is winning here. I mean,
I think that's surely been one of Netanyahu's policies, though, really, in terms of splitting the two. Anyway, Marty Ryan, let's take your question. Marty Ryan in Connecticut.
Yes, I'm in the U.S. And just as an aside, I did a little research to find out what the population, what percentage of the U.S. population is Jewish. And it's 3%, which really was a very big surprise to me, and exert a lot of pressure.
More? Did you think, Marty, it was more, did you?
Sorry?
Did you think it was more?
I did, because I live in a part of the country where there is a very large Jewish population. But in any event, what would you have the U.S. do?
That's a big, well, Sam, that's a big one. For just starters, stop supplying Israel with arms, but it's bigger than that.
Yes. Hi, Marty. I mean, first, I would say your statistic is important, but irrelevant. Right? This is not about Jews at all. This is about a sovereign nation called Israel, which is undertaking policies which are now being evaluated as genocide. And if we had any doubt about that, the leading voices today, which are speaking out against this state of Israel's actions, are Jewish community members in organizations like Breaking the Silence and If Not Now, and so many others. This is not about Jews. This is about a state. And if we don't make that differentiation, we will be playing into this myth that somehow Jews are controlling the world or controlling the U.S. They don't. A pro-Israeli lobby has a choke neck on the U.S. Congress, and that's what we need to be looking at. In terms of what can be done, I mean, I think there's many things, but first, let's hold Israel accountable to our own laws. not international law, but to the US laws. The US has on the books several laws, long time, like lead law, which is basically talking about how you hold accountable anybody who gets arms from the US, how you hold accountable anybody who has a long record of human rights violations, et cetera, et cetera. These are US laws on the book. The US has been refusing to apply those accountability tools to the state of Israel. Not now, not since October 7th, but for the last 75 years. And that's why once we put this into context, we can see that the US stance towards how Israel is operating is part and parcel of why we are where we are today. I write frequently. I haven't wrote anything since October 6th, October 7th, because I feel that I've written everything that needs to be read. If you need to learn about the conflict now, you're too late. You haven't been paying attention for the last 75 years, not you, but in general. What I have been doing is reading a lot. And one of the books that I reread during this last 6 months is two professors from the US, The Israel Lobby, they wrote, Mersheimer and Walt. These are two professors, one from Chicago, one from Harvard. If you read The Israel Lobby, it's a 10-year-old book. It is in great demand today because it explains in great detail how that lobby has positioned itself to be able to force the US lawmakers to work outside of US interests. There's another place that I'd like to point to, actually two other places. One is the nonprofit world, the 501c3 world, getting tax-deductible status and recruiting funds from the US that are going into, for example, illegal Israeli settlements. They're actually going into things that the US foreign policy has said it's illegal. So we need to be able to stop that flow of funds that come out of the US through these nonprofits. And that's coming out of your pocket at the end of the day, because if they're not paying taxes on it, that means you're participating in it. And the third one that I'll point to, and there's many more, are Israeli bonds. Israel has launched a long time ago a bond program where they ask communities to buy Israeli bonds. They have launched since October 7th a huge campaign, which, as I understand, is getting a lot of reaction, a lot of funds. And these are coming from state treasuries, from local council treasuries, from individuals, from organizations. Those are funds that go directly into the Israeli treasury, allowing the Israelis to use those funds to continue settlement building and to continue supporting the war in Gaza. Those kinds of channels that are supporting Israel's ongoing violations, not only of international law and human rights, but of sheer common sense, need to stop. And that's something we can stop stateside. Our representatives need to hear us, not only with open letters and not only with letters to the editor and not only with letters to their office. They need to see us in person and understand that there is a cost if they're going to continue to blindly not allow Israel to be held accountable or to allow these channels of funding to continue without any kind of oversight.
It's worth mentioning, Sam, that this year I was just reading in Haaretz that Israel has seized or declared as state-owned property more land this year than any previous year on record, and that's obviously under with the backing of Netanyahu's coalition partners. So
they are actually challenging Biden. When Biden talked about the 4 settlers, out of all the 700,000 settlers, he picked 4 and said that they would not be allowed into the U.S. The right-wing Israeli government, in order to challenge that, actually took the largest part of land as a new settlement. So they are in direct confrontation with not only the White House, not only with U.S. laws, but with any kind of effort to move this issue forward. And that's important to think about, of how they are challenging us at every step of the way to make this much harder to back out of or to address the core issue. The core issue is Palestinian statehood. And from day one, 16 years ago, Netanyahu said there will never be a Palestinian state. And he's been very consistent ever since. So when is the U.S. going to use its leverage to get Israel to fall in line with international law? Because it is the only country that has the leverage to do so. Okay.
Taghreed, I want to come back to the day-to-day, and I do want people to ask more questions. We've got people in Australia, we've got people in the UK, we've got people in the US, and I know lots of people, a lot of you know this subject well, so I'd love to have some questions, more questions from you. Taghreed, can you tell us a bit more about, I mean, how do you keep in contact with your family? And I'm thinking less perhaps about your family in Cairo, but I'm thinking about your other relatives who are in Rafah or elsewhere within Gaza.
Yeah, through Facebook Messenger. That's what works the best. That's my sister husband. He refused to leave, their house in Ramallah area, not far from Shifa area. Like many of my relatives refused to leave, and sometimes they leave, like outside when they attacked. When the Israelis went back to Shifa again, they went a few blocks away, but they kept being in the place. And for me, I'm like, my God. And even my relative, cousin Hind, who is covering for Al Jazeera English, she is in middle areas, and her entire family, they left, but she refused, and she is keeping covering it for Al Jazeera English. I mean, and Marty, you ask a question, and for me, I would say it's time for the Jews all over the world to distance themselves from Israel and to be very loud, because in a way, it's extremely painful when whenever you criticize Israel, and then they immediately the response, oh, you are anti-Semitic. They have to fight, like the Jews all over the world, they have to be very loud in condemning the genocide committed by Israel, in distancing themselves from Israel. And I mean, like, I don't know. I feel like it's time to be.
They might argue that why should they? I mean, so Israel's a state, and they might. I think the riposte might be that everyone. The onus is on everyone to hold any state to accountable, whether it's Russia or Israel that commits these crimes. And it's not a question of whether you're a Jew or not. I think, as Sam said earlier, I think that's how they might respond to it. But Taghreed, can you talk a bit more about what's your routine? You talk about Facebook Messenger. I presume, and we've spoken about this before. You get up, you hear the news in the morning. You don't know what's happened to your relatives' homes. You don't know who's been hurt.
Like, you saw the images of people who went to, they dropped food from the sky, like for Gazans, and then, for me, it was extremely painful to see people like going and to collect this, whatever was thrown by whatever the Americans, whatever, and then they are shot and killed by Israeli snipers. And that's, for me, is extremely like, have we reached that stage? The dehumanization, the crimes committed by Israel, have exceeded, I cannot comprehend that we are watching. And like you spoke about the word central kitchen. I mean, and it's extremely painful. But this is what's happening to the Palestinians. Since, like I covered the second Intifada, that was happening to Palestinians when they attack them, when they kill them in such manner. And it took, international, workers, which is too painful, like that, it brought this attention. But this is happening to the Palestinians on a daily basis now, since the war has started. And it took them a few months before changing the narrative in the mainstream media. The first two wars, it's like like whenever I watch, whether CNN, BBC, I was cursing the whole time, or like, all these mainstream international media and the papers. Yeah. All of a sudden, it took them a few months before, yes, like Israel is doing this and that. And all of a sudden, the narrative has changed, but it took a while. And I cannot forgive them for neglecting, the Palestinian narrative for a while during this war.
Yeah. Sam, I want to, the question, the huge question is, what happens next? Further ahead, let's say if Biden loses an election, you've got a Trump presidency. We've had 6 months of war. It is conceivable, but this conflict could draw out for a very long period of time. The other side of that question is not what happens in the US, but what happens in Israeli politics and Netanyahu's government. At the moment, there's a conflict with Iran that could develop. And that the ramifications for that are huge, but presumably don't threaten the coalition.
Before I answer that, can I just make one statement regarding the Jewish community? Because I do think that there's a special place for the Jewish community to speak out above and beyond others. There is a process going on where Israel is speaking or saying that it is speaking on behalf of all Jews worldwide. That means if we understand that there's a distinction between the Jewish communities and the state of Israel, one needs to understand that there's an identity theft going on. If I took your identity and went and got a Visa card and started buying things, you would be furious. You would hold me accountable. And I think the Jewish community needs to be furious and hold Israel accountable for claiming that it is representing Jews worldwide when those Jews don't have a way to be able to elect Israeli leaders and so forth. Just a separate case there. In terms of what needs to go forward, what needs to happen going forward, looking at it from a very Palestinian perspective, the first thing that needs to happen is that we need to take this as an opportunity to go back to the basics and resolve this conflict, if we even want to call it a conflict. The source of this is clear. It's embedded in international law and international resolutions, in political will around the world, even in the US, in terms of what they say is very clear, that there needs to be a Palestinian state in order for the Palestine and Israel, these two states, to live side by side and figure out how to live together moving forward if they want to. For that to happen, both states, number one, need to be recognized. The Western community recognized the state of Israel 75 years ago. The US recognized Israel 11 minutes after it was announced in 1948. What is taking so long for the US to recognize on paper the Palestinian state? Biden has said from the beginning of this war that that's what needs to happen. Okay, so you haven't allowed it to happen until now, so make it happen. There does not need to be a process for bilateral recognition of a Palestinian state. So if I don't see that happening, then I don't think we're addressing the core issue here, which is giving Palestinians self-determination within a state. Will that resolve all the issues? No, it won't. There'll still be discrimination inside of the state of Israel against non-Jews. Those issues need to be worked on. But the core of this conflict is the production of a state on the ground. I should note here, and as you well know, the Palestinian state is recognized by over 140 countries in the world. There is a UN General Assembly resolution that had 138 countries vote yes to and 9 vote against. The US, Canada, Panama, Nauru, Palau, and the Marshall Islands. I mean, the last 3 can fit in my bedroom. The majority of the world has already said yes to a Palestinian state. It is the US which is blocking the ability for that to move forward. So if Biden wants to put his axe where his mouth is, he needs to do that recognition. That's something from the executive council, from the executive body of government. So it doesn't need Congress. It doesn't need anything except the president to say, we recognize the state of Palestine. That's a starting point. Then we have to translate that on the ground. What day are the Israeli tanks going to go out of Gaza? What day are the Israeli tanks going to go out of the West Bank in order for this state to come to fruition? That's from a Palestinian perspective. If statehood is not a result of this opportunity, then this will just drag on forever. Israeli politics are rather clear today. Over the last 2 decades, Israel has been moving right-wing. Every election, and they've been having many recently, they are moving more and more right-wing, to the point where you have illegal settlers sitting in the government and being the kingmakers of this government's policies in Israel. So if Israel does not elect a sound government that understands that Israel will have to in the future live next to a Palestinian state. If that doesn't happen, and the US does not use their leverage to make that happen, then Israel would be blocking the will of the global community to allow a resolution of this, because the goal is to resolve it, not to just tidy up the genocide and move forward. So that will have to happen. In the US, there is the ability to do that. I don't see they can do it, given their short-term sightedness in terms of electoral politics and the influence of that pro-Israeli lobby. The Palestinians internally need to get their act together. We need to speak in one voice. And to be honest with you, when we do that and decide on a unified strategy, it could be a strategy of negotiations only, it could be a strategy of violence only, or it could be nonviolent resistance while we negotiate. Those are three different options. I can deal with any of them. I might not want to participate in some of them, but collectively we have to have a clear decision moving forward. We don't have that today. However,
yeah, I mean, the question
that should not be a reason for the international community not to act. I mean, I live here the last 2 weeks in America. America is not so unified, right? But there is a political agency, and we respect that political agency. The same thing we need to apply to Palestinians. They have internal conflict. Surprise, surprise. They're normal people and have domestic politics, but there is a Palestinian political agency, and that is very clear. And there's a chair at the UN where that person sits, and we can deal with that. If I want to deal with all the elements of the society, then let me deal with all the elements of the US society. Instead of talking about the Republicans and Democrats, let me talk about the Proud Boys and the KKK. We don't do that. We talk about political agency.
Okay, a good follow-up question here from Tim Ripley. And Tim, I think the point you're making is, I mean, we know about, I think you're going to talk about Israeli lobbying, and we obviously know about the effectiveness of that in the US, but I think probably some people may be less aware of its recent impact in Britain and elsewhere in Europe, and that's what your question's about here, Tim.
Yeah, Nick, well done on you two participants for making their case very well. Their problem there is the Israeli government and their supporters make their case better. And they have had for 75 years, have been launching what we would now call, in modern speak, an information war. They have used all their levers of their state power and their political support to penetrate the political systems of the United States, Britain, and several other countries to make their case in a very effective way. And they are, I would call them dirty street fighters. You know, they have no scruples, and they are unscrupulous in some of the things they do. And they have this thing, I mean, in Britain, we have this thing called the lots of accusations about anti-Semitism flying around and government ministers trying to ban pro-Palestinian marches. And the Israeli government and their supporters use a thing called the Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism to brand anybody who promotes a Palestinian state or accuses Israel of being an apartheid state of being anti-Semitic. And it is really powerful. It produces fear on a massive scale in British politicians and probably American ones. And well, you've got we saw it with Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party. Keir Starmer, our possible future Prime Minister, is more supportive of Israel than the government because he's absolutely petrified of this being branded anti-Semitic. It is all pervasive. And it just
Sam, you must be pretty shocked by the move of the British government, and obviously the British government actually supported the United States against the case in the international the ICJ for Palestinian statehood. And they had the same stance as they did on the Chagos Islands. So the stance of the British government has really shifted from the 1990s and earlier. It's much more pro-Israel than it used to be.
Absolutely, and partly because that pro-Israeli lobby that we spoke about is very active now in Europe and in the UK specifically. And I assume you've seen or have heard about the Al Jazeera documentary that sent an investigative reporter inside the UK's pro-Israeli lobby and revealed over 5 episodes of how they operate. And like you, Tim, I think it was, said very clearly, they are dirty street fighters in terms of how they are operating to hijack political systems of foreign countries. I'm a board member of an organization called Just Vision, and we produced a documentary a couple years ago, which is getting a lot of coverage now. I'll put it in the chat. Maybe Nick can pass it on. It's called Boycott. It talks about how states in the US are legislating against anyone who boycotts the state of Israel. And if you look at that, it's streaming, so you can see it easily. It talks about how Israel created an organization to bypass U.S. supervision to be able to operate, to influence U.S. politics. It's shocking when you see it. But that is happening in the UK as well. But the same thing that's happening in the US is happening in the UK. The constituencies are changing in a different direction, and that is bound to break apart. When you have the institution moving in one way and blindly supporting Israel, and the base of those parties moving the other way, wanting to hold Israel accountable, wanting to see a resolution to this conflict, there is a time where that is going to come apart. And it's an incremental process. It's not happening fast enough, but it's definitely happening. The polls are showing that the constituencies of the parties are not matching the institutional leadership of the parties. And for us, time is of essence, but we have to work with what we have. And I think the mobilization happening around this war is groundbreaking. It's historic, to be honest with you. And that'll change things. I mean, I'm an old timer, so politics change by old-fashioned ways. I mean, we need to hit the ground and do the footwork
but
needed.
Sam, if you're an old timer, you've just seen it get worse and worse and worse and worse. I mean, I first went to the West Bank when I was 19, and I remember seeing a young Palestinian boy being shot in Bethlehem, and it had a huge impact on me. Things have just got worse since. It hasn't gotten any better.
I wouldn't say that, to be honest with you. Yes, on the ground, for sure, when we've hit genocide, we've gotten to the worst of the worst in terms of on the ground, but politically not. I mean, when I started the university, I couldn't say Palestine on my university. Today, every single university of meaning has an apartheid week, which talks about the apartheid state of Israel. You can say Palestine without people thinking you're from Pakistan. You're seeing the majority of the countries of the world recognize the state of Palestine. Those are historic moves forward for anyone wanting to find a way out. We are blocked because of the U.S. mainly. And if the U.S. would change its politics, the European Union would change its politics. That's all that needs to happen. The rest of the world is already in line with seeing a Palestinian state next to the state of Israel. Remember, nobody's talking about knocking the state of Israel out of the equation. It's about knocking the Israeli military out of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip for us to build our state so we can live side by side. That is the equation the Palestinians have put forward.
But before we wrap up, I do want to, if anybody wants to give to a charity that works in Gaza, supporting people facing horrendous conditions, do either of you have any recommendations? I know Medical Aid for Palestine has been in existence for a very long period of time. UNHCR has got campaigns going, Oxfam too. But is there anything specific? Sam, we're giving to a charity that you support that helps support Palestinian businesses. But any ideas from both of you there? Taghreed, do you have anything?
I can send you later.
Links. Okay, fine.
And I just sent you about 10.
Right. That was quick. Taghreed, your last thoughts before we wrap up.
I think there has been a shift when it comes to, the state of Israel and what's Israel standing for, whatever. And I think giving the genocide, the image of Israel is not the same. And I think, I feel, like Netanyahu provoked Iran in a way to change that narrative, because you have young Jewish people for the first time, you have this very strong voice within the young Jewish generation speaking against Israel, distancing themselves from the state of Israel and criticizing the generation of their parents. This is really something we have to take into consideration. It's not like before. Israel is trying, they have the monopoly of victimhood, and that's what they are trying to sell to Jews all over, and that's how they promote the state of Israel. But it is changing, and you feel like if you walk now for the first time, in the Jewish, neighborhood, in Amsterdam, you have the Palestinian flag everywhere. You see it in Europe everywhere. This is new. Never, how many wars took place against Gaza before? 4? Nothing, for the first time, I see the Palestinian flag everywhere. I think there is a shift, but how how to invest in that shift. Sam, that's the question for us as Palestinians, or people who believe in the just cause, that is the Palestinian cause, that is just, it doesn't have to be Palestinian working, to help with that.
Okay. Well, listen, I'm very grateful to both of you for your time. Sam, when are you heading back to Ramallah?
I head back on Saturday.
Okay, great. Well, I do hope that we can get to see you before long. Obviously, it's too difficult at the moment, and our study tours there have ceased, and I do hope we can get back. And maybe one day we can go to Gaza. Who knows? Taghreed El-Khodary.
I'm going to go to Cairo.
Are you going to go to Cairo? Okay, to see your
family for the first time after this, and I will keep you posted.
Okay, excellent. I'm very glad to hear it. Thank you very much indeed, Taghreed El-Khodary and Sam Bahour. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.